And earlier, I spoke to Professor Nien-he Hsieh of Harvard University. He's an expert on the democratization of economies. I started by asking him about basic terms of economic democracy.
I should give credit to where credit is due. It's not entirely my idea. This is an idea that many people have talked about. But I think what's important to identify at the beginning is a distinction between two ways of thinking about this idea of economic democracy. So one view I think that's quite common is trying to ensure that people either don't fall below a certain kind of level of livelihood, that people have jobs, and that they have a fairly decent standard of living. So you can think of that in terms of trying to equalize, in some sense, the playing field, both in terms of opportunities and also in terms of the outcomes of people's economic activity. That's sort of one view, but the view that I think is more compelling, and I think one that really is important if we are to make progress on some of the issues that we're talking about with regard to, say, inclusion and real democracy, is to not just think of it in terms of equalizing opportunities and also outcomes, but getting people to think in terms of how they relate to one another in the context of economic activity, where people can really see each other in terms of their economic relations as equals. So it's not just in terms of their own opportunities and outcomes, but really in terms of how they relate to one another as equals. And that seems to me a very important part of the concept of economic democracy.
We are, Professor, the most unequal society in the world, that is South Africa. We have got the widest Gini coefficient in the world. What does that mean for the quality of our democracy?
So again, you could just look at the Gini coefficient and think to yourself that, well, if we could equalize that, that would sort of help things there. But I think it's really the question of what are we equalizing and the relationships that people stand in relation to one another. And I believe that how people stand in relationship to one another in economic terms, right, does have an impact in terms of how people can relate to each other in democratic terms. Right? And so unless there is a certain kind of equality in terms of relationship, right, at the economic level, it's difficult to also have that at the political level, no matter how much you want to try to inculcate, as it were, the political system from the economic system.
Professor, we have a situation in South Africa where privilege is mainly associated with whiteness and disadvantage with blackness. Do you think you could advise us on how to create a more inclusive, deracialized, and more fair economy?
Well, let's begin by saying that this is obviously a challenge that's not unique to South Africa. This is a challenge we also see here in the United States. And I think what we can learn from that challenge is that until there is a common sense of what I might call solidarity, it's very hard to simply try to either simply deracialize or try to equalize opportunities.
Well, solidarity is a very good note to end off our discussion on, Professor. We've run out of time tonight, but solidarity is what Sowetans are trying to engender in their attempts to build a stock exchange, stokvels, mutual investing, and a myriad of other entrepreneurial ventures into which they have now committed themselves.
Yes, no, I think that's right. I think the idea is that this idea that we're sort of collectively bound together in terms of our common fate, that is something that has to be added to this idea of trying to both deracialize and also make the economy more inclusive. So it's very encouraging to hear about these initiatives, and I certainly very much look forward to learning more about them and following them in terms of their progress.